little bit of fun. We're calling it Unlocking David Einhorn. He's the co-founder and president of the hedge fund Greenlight Capital. Many of you know him as the hedge fund manager who famously got it right on Lehman Brothers, that the firm was drowning in a swarm of debt, and as you know, Lehman eventually went bankrupt. Einhorn set up the firm back in 1996 with less than $1 million, half of which came from his parents. Now the company has nearly $7 billion under management. David has just published a paperback edition of his best-selling book, Fooling Some of the People All of the Time. It is about the long battle with Allied Capital and explains why he shorted Lehman. And David will be with us for the next 2 hours. And David, great to have you with us. Before we get started, though, I wanted to talk about some of the key issues that are affecting the markets right now. We've come up with some topics that, generally speaking, are affecting the economy, the markets and the economy. First up is the European debt crisis. I know that, we've talked so much about it, but I know you've got some views on where what gets you going on the European debt crisis.
Right. What's interesting about the European debt crisis and the way that it's being handled, from what I can see, is one of the lessons that the authorities seem to have drawn from the Lehman failure is to not allow anything that is very big to be allowed to fail. And that includes, obviously, any of these European governments. And so it puts itself into a pretty interesting position because you have entities that look like they're insolvent, look like they would default, and the authorities have decided that nothing is allowed to fail.
You're talking about Greece, you're talking about Portugal.
Sure, whatever they happen to be. I'm not going to particularize which ones, but generally speaking, whether it's the banks or the governments, there's a fair amount of insolvency here. And what's interesting is if people realize that they're going to be bailed out no matter what, because the system isn't going to allow it, then they have no incentive to make concessions.
And what does that mean for you as an investor? Say for the euro, which everyone says the euro is going to continue to slide, but if ultimately they keep things together, are you somebody who would be bullish on buying the euro or something like that?
No, I don't really have a strong view one way or the other on the currency itself. But the dynamic in terms of how a default or non-default and how the situation plays out, I think it's very interesting, more from a society at large basis.
But how do you factor, but it's a good question from John, how do you factor that in when you look at various companies that have exposure to Europe?
Yes, we own a fair number of European equities, and basically we've hedged out the currency so that we effectively own them in dollars.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. The other topic that's on the mind of everybody these days, and was certainly on the mind yesterday in D.C., is jobs. What gets you going on that?
Well, I don't think there's an obvious, easy solution to the jobs problem. If there were, we would have come upon it and fixed it. And I think part of the problem is that people sort of have an expectation that, well, if the Fed does this, or if the Treasury does that, or if we cut taxes this way, all of a sudden there's going to be a tremendous recovery in jobs. In order to have jobs, I think we have to figure out what it is that creates wealth. And wealth is created not by stock prices going up and people feeling, richer. Wealth is created by making goods and services that are more valuable than it costs them to produce. And what we need to do, I think, is think about it from a country's perspective. How is it that we can create a climate where people can create goods and services that are more valuable than
But I would say that people were feeling very wealthy, though, during the stock market rally in the 90s, though, right?
And recently, too. The trend in jobless claims has given reason for people to buy into the stock market right now. Do you look at the job story when you decide on an investment right now?
Not really, no.